So this is a pretty basic talk. I'm gonna go into a little bit about a personal project of mine, but depending on what skill level you're at, this might be a little easier, a little harder, but we'll see. We'll just roll with it. So my name is Jane. I'm from New York City, and that's my handle pretty much everywhere. And so I've come into this problem of being an adult is really hard. I think, anyway. So I've been, having a lot of issues like just managing my time, kind of trying to keep track of all the things that are going on in my life. Like, I was taking a new medication, and my doctor was like, you have to keep track of like when you take your medication, how it makes you feel, and all that stuff. And I was like, I wish I didn't have to do that on my own. And so it's, and also having to take that medication every day at the same time. So I don't know if you've ever had this kind of problem where you aren't consistent, your life is really busy, so you don't have time to like worry about these things. But, it's important to remember that good habits are always built with incremental wins. What does that mean? That means that, if I have a goal, keep the tasks that I have to do for that goal as small as possible. So medication is one example where you kind of have to be consistent, do something once a day. And so there's so many other things that you kind of want to build good habits about, right? Maybe you're trying to avoid certain foods or something that make you feel sick. Or maybe you drink too much and you kind of need to tone it down, and how do you deal with that? I kind of got this idea. So for example, another goal is to just become a better photographer. How do you do that? You might take one picture every single day. So you have this small little thing that you can do that will basically go towards your big goal. Maybe you want to commit something every single day to GitHub. I don't think I know anyone who has this kind of streak. It looks kind of like impossible. I don't know if you have something like that. If you do, we can talk. So there's this idea of these goals and being able to kind of break them down into incremental little tasks. And so that is basically going to set you up for success for the long term and really just help you make gains in your life. So now we're talking about tracking something every day. So in my mind, the way to do this is to be able to track something on a daily basis or over a period of time. So you can wear fitness trackers and you can, Apple Watches and things like that, but not everyone has one doesn't want to wear one on their wrist. Two, they don't actually offer you all the APIs and data that you kind of want to have access to. And so if you want to track a bunch of personal data, so say, if I wanted to track when I take the medication every day, and then maybe if I feel kind of moody that day, if I get angry about something, I'll track that. Or if I have an injury and I'm trying to keep track of the pain level, something like that. So there's a lot of personal data that you can gather just from keeping a log of anything. Maybe you want to keep a log of how consistent you've been committing to GitHub, so you have that streak chart. But what if you just wanted to quantify that yourself? And so with any fitness tracker, an Apple Watch, like the health app, or any kind of health kit type thing that's offered, you don't own that data. It's not yours to keep, right? And you don't know necessarily how to interact with that API if there's one offered. So I kind of thought of an idea of why don't I try to code out one myself. So then I thought of this idea of a personal API where you have your own data, you own your own data, you store it however you want, and then you basically create an API to expose whatever kind of data and any filters or queries that you want to put on top of those. So that's how I came up with this idea for Life API, which is like DIY personal tracking with code. And of course, it's all written in JavaScript because we're here at Node Interactive. And so let's write a personal API then. But first, let's do a refresher. We're not talking about just any APIs. We're talking about RESTful APIs. And if you don't remember, RESTful API stands for Representational State Transfer. But what that really means, it's a resource-based service, and it's our common architecture that is pretty prevalent on the web today, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. I know there's things like other API type things like GraphQL popping up, but REST APIs are still kind of the standard. And a REST API is a REST API because of these constraints. So a uniform interface, which basically means kind of like consistency. stateless, so you don't store any kind of state on the server side, and you kind of maintain that on the, if you have a client-side application, you maintain state there, and all you're doing is asking for resources from the service. It's cacheable, so you can be able to ping the same service and get faster results based on like if you had queried that already once before. It depends on the idea of a client and a server. So you have a client that's using a REST API, which is a server, to get resources. And then a layered system, which kind of just means that you don't have to rely on knowledge about the server to ask it for resources. So all you know is like kind of the structure that the data is going to be returned as, and what you want to get out of it. So that's all the client knows. So kind of separation of concerns that is really popular in web development. The server takes care of just like giving you the data that you need and making sure, and like all the hardware level implementations, things like that about like network connections, what kind of like if you're using Nginx or something like that, that's all kind of abstracted away for the person utilizing the client API. So these are basically what makes a RESTful API. If you don't fulfill every single one of these requirements, it's not a RESTful API. It's REST-ish API, I guess you would call that. So like I said, REST isn't going anyway anytime soon. So there's a whole like dissertation about how REST was like basically created. Super interesting. If you like basically Google RESTful dissertation, you'll be able to find like there's a whole like document kind of going into technical abstract detail about what REST is. So common things that you have to keep in mind when you're writing a RESTful API is that you want to use plurals. So in the example that I'm about to show, which is the that app that I made, we have basically logs and inputs. And so making sure it's logs, not log, because you're basically querying kind of a database. So it kind of keeps with that idea. And you don't have to call something like log list. You can just call it logs in a very collections-oriented type of way. And then I have something /inputs, which is another endpoint. So you want to keep your segments short because we're basically representing very granular resources. So like in the app that I made, we have inputs, which are like basically just a time log. It's just like has an object with a time stamp and like maybe a log associated with it. So keep it super short. This is a very like simple example, but even when you scale up to large applications, you will kind of want to make sure that you're not creating insanely long URIs because that's unwieldy for the programmer. It's annoying to look at, so make sure to keep it short and make sure to remember that you kind of want to keep your resources as like atomic as possible. So there's that. So the one nice thing about this project is the tools that I used kind of help me structure the API in a way that like basically the front end, the queries in the front end mirror the back end structure. So the first line is just the regular put request without the body. You have to have a body with the put request. So that's log / time bedtime. And then the second line is a PouchDB, which is a CouchDB JavaScript API. And so I just take logs and I .put the log, which log contains the data and the ID and reference that it needs to update the database. So that's a database call. It looks very similar to the URI that's above it. So kind of mirroring it, PouchDB really makes this easy because it speaks the language of HTTP in a way that is understandable for a front-end developer. So as I mentioned, these are tools I used. I use Happy.js for my middleware, and I think it helped me set up my routes really nicely. I know sometimes in Express it can get a bit confusing in terms of like flow and structure, but I'll show you in a code sample. Basically, I have all my routes in one file, and it's very straightforward. And you'll see in a second what that looks like. So this app is basically, as I mentioned before, we have a bunch of logs. So I'll go into basically more concrete details about what that means. Each log is made up of inputs, and every input is a time input with an optional text field. But that's just in my app. You can do whatever you want in yours. So let's see. So we have this running, this running. So I just have a bunch of demo data loaded up here, and here's the website. My internet just cut out. One second. Ooh, that's not good. hit preloaded. Oh, I see. So I have CouchDB running as the actual database. So I should have that running in the background before I do this. Okay, great. So here is a bunch of logs that might not make any sense to you. Let me make this a little bigger. So I gave a couple of examples before, but I have basically a bunch of different inputs I can do, and all I have to do is press a button to create an input into that log. So say like I'm feeling cranky, I can just click drop in mood and it'll record a new data point like this. So I have on that top line, you can see this is just basically a nice debugging interface for myself to be able to look at my data in a raw-ish format. I can track maybe what time I go to bed every night, which is actually super useful if you're trying to track anything like if I go to bed at a certain time, does it affect how I feel the next day? And then I also have one emoji feels, which is basically if I'm feeling a certain way. Right now I'm a little nervous. No, I'm okay. I'm doing all right. So maybe I'm happy. So I have this emoji and I can just submit that and it creates a log right there. And so I have like an input type called text emoji. So if you wanted to create a new type of log, so say if I wanted to keep track of every time I drank water, so like you're supposed to drink, I guess, I don't know if you guys use cups here, but like 8 cups of water a day, which is hard for some people. I think it sounds like a lot. So if I wanted to say drink water, call that drink water. So every time I drink a sip of water, I just click on that. And so now you're looking at this and you might think, oh, so what's the big deal? We have a bunch of data. So going to just like a simple example, let me just make sure that data is fresh. All right, so if we go to this page. So you can do a bunch of things, like visualization is the most obvious example that comes to mind, where you're, so I have basically like emoji frequency. So if I feel like maybe I can track over time, like in 1 week, how often I felt like stressed out or like, how sleepy I felt, things like that. So you can just make it nice that. By the way, I learned D3 really quickly to make these graphs, so excuse their crudeness. And you can also look at something like these trends, which I kind of alluded to before, where you're keeping track of, say, something like morning meds, like a medication that you're supposed to take every day at the same time, and then see if anything happens if you kind of take it too late. Like, for example, there's this blue dot over here. I took the medication like way later in the day, so what happened after that kind of thing. So I think there's more of, this is a bit contrived data because I didn't actually be able to track real data, but this is kind of like what my week looks like. So there's that. And then here's another one if you really wanted to, say you like drink a lot and you don't know when to stop, so you can build something out that helps you keep track of how many drinks you had. So if I'm drinking throughout the night, so this basically in a 6 or 7 hour period, it like basically keeps track of how many drinks I had. And if I have too many drinks, it gets all red and kind of warns you that you should probably stop drinking and get too drunk. But yeah, I swear I'm not drinking right now. This is just an illustration. So there's that. These are all the different things you can do with this kind of data, but this is super simple. I think the way that creating an API and thinking about your use case and what you need it for is really what made this interesting to me, and kind of applying whatever API creation knowledge on top of that. And you can play around with different kinds of inputs if you wanted to get a little more granular, set up more API endpoints. And the way I have this set up in, so I basically have a bunch of GET requests, but on top of that I can also query based on time. So just adding a bunch of filters on top of the original GET request to get more data. Say I wanted to only look at 1 week of my life, or if I wanted to look over a couple of months. So that's basically it. This is constantly a work in progress, and that's the nice thing about it is that it kind of evolves with what you know. I'm actually mostly a front-end developer, so this was kind of a way for me to start working in the back end, try to think about how to create an API, like what that actually means. And so, yeah, so it's always a work in progress. And that's it. Does anyone have any questions? If not, thank you so much, and have a good rest of the day. on GitHub.